The Boston Massacre was a very tragic event that took place on March 5th, 1770. Just 3 weeks after the Boston Massacre event took place, Paul Revere created an engraving of the Boston Massacre, and it was one of the most effective pieces of war propaganda in American history. It was used to show an example of the events that had taken place. The engraving shows a line of British soldiers firing into an American crowd. There are several events and elements used in this engraving, but a few of them are the British being lined up and an officer giving an order to fire, the soldier's stance indicating a very aggressive and military posture, the weather conditions shown do not match the soldier's testimony as there is no snow. The British soldiers look like they are really enjoying the violence, and there are only two signs in the image, which are Butcher's Hall and Customs House, hanging directly above the soldiers. The colonists are shown reacting to the British when in fact they had attacked the soldiers. The engraving of the Boston Massacre event is shown unfolding in front of the State House, which still stands today. All the soldiers and officer have a cold and determined look on their faces. The engraving accurately shows the 5 victims that were affected by this tragic event. Within the engraving, Paul Revere includes a poem, and below the poem, he honors the names of the dead and the wounded. Revere's Bloody Massacre is included in nearly every textbook in American history today. He created this engraving to serve as patriot propaganda, as it is a biased depiction of the Boston Massacre.
On the night of March 5th, 1770, there was a confrontation between a group of British soldiers and some colonists in Boston, Massachusetts. This event, later known as the Boston Massacre, became important. In the engraving, it is depicted as a brutal and unprovoked attack on British soldiers or innocent colonists. But really, the event was different. The British soldiers had been stationed in Boston for a long time to enforce Britain's tax laws. The colonists did not like them there. Tension had been building for months because the colonists viewed the soldiers as Britain trying to rule them. Arguments and small fights between soldiers and colonists were not uncommon, but this night the situation got out of control. It all began when a group of colonists gathered near the customs house on King Street. What started as a small crowd of young men workers quickly grew into a larger, more agitated mob. The colonists yelled insults at the soldiers and threw snowballs, ice, and small stones at them. As the crowd's aggression increased, so did the worry of British soldiers. Captain Thomas Preston, the officer in charge of soldiers, tried to maintain control and keep his men from acting, but the situation became too much. One of the most well-known figures in the crowd was Crispus Attucks, a Native American African man who was a sailor, a dock worker. Attucks was known as a strong and assertive man, and he was right in front of the colonists. He played an active role that night, reportedly urging the colonists and others to stand their ground against the soldiers. As tension escalated, everything got chaotic. The colonists continued to shout and throw objects at the soldiers. In the chaos, someone shouted the word fire. Hearing this, one soldier shot the gun, and within 7 seconds, several other soldiers did too. The result was deadly. Crispus Attucks was struck in the chest and died instantly. He was the first one to die. 4 other colonists were also killed, several other wounded, and panic spread as the crowd scattered in fear. Immediately after the Boston Massacre, colonists were very angry and they saw the massacre as innocent colonists, though the reality was more complicated. The the British soldiers claimed they acted in self-defense, arguing that they were scared for their lives due to the hostile crowd. Captain Peterson, who was present during the incident, says that he never gave the order to fire. One of the most influential depictions of the Boston Massacre was an engraving by Paul Revere, a Boston silversmith and an active member of the Patriots. His image, titled "The Bloody Massacre," showed British soldiers standing in the formation, calmly firing their guns into a defenseless crowd of colonists. This image omitted key details like snowballs and thrown objects, and the hostile nature of the crowd. Instead, it showed British soldiers as aggressors, and the engraving was widely distributed throughout the colonies, increasing anti-British sentiment and was strengthening resistance against the British rule.
Its actual title is "Bloody Massacre Perpetrated in King Street in Boston," but most people consider it the engraving of the Boston Massacre. When analyzing the engraving, you can see two divided sides consisting of British soldiers on the right and the left are the colonists. There are images of fear and horror throughout the colonists' face. There are a few bodies on the ground, only consisting of the colonists, which illustrate that this is indeed a one-sided affair. It also seems as if there is a man in the back of the British side who is giving out the order to do this. There is also a dog seen at the very bottom of the engraving, which could have a secret meaning of its own. Some seem to speculate that it could mean the British considered us worse than dogs, but no one will ever know the true meaning. There is a tall building in the center, which is the old State House, which still is present in Boston today. There is also another building in the engraving, which is the first church. There is also a short story or poem listed at the bottom expressing Paul Revere's outrage towards the attack on them. He also honored the names of the dead and wounded below the poem. The piece itself is a form of propaganda intended to ensure the procession of independence. It was on sale within 3 weeks of the event, but it was not intended to be entirely accurate to these events that transpired. It is considered propaganda due to the time it was created and many inaccuracies throughout it. Some discrepancies that are just not true to history include the number of soldiers shown within the engraving. It was a powerful tool that brought all the colonists together when America was against all the British policies. Another fact that should be noted is that Paul Revere himself did not create this drawing, but it was done by a young man named Henry Pelham. Paul himself was not a skilled artist, but could engrave quite well.